everyone. Welcome again to the episode 26 of our JIPS webinar podcast series. So in this podcast, we will discuss global mobility and MNE competitiveness. My name is Stephanie Wang. I am associate professor at Kelley School of Business, Indiana University. I am one of the regular co-hosts of this webinar podcast series. Klaus Meyer, professor of IB from Ivy School of Business, and Professor Carl Fay, a professor of strategy from BI Norwegian Business School. They are the other regular co-host. So first of all, I'm absolutely very delighted to welcome all of you to today's session from various corners of the world. I know that the panelists are from all over the world as well. So if you're joining us for the first time, welcome, and welcome back to many old friends. So again, as I said many times, our goal is to create this vibrant platform for exchanging fresh research ideas and exploring their real-world implication. So in each episode, we really select some recently published papers, some of those even not online yet. So in this episode, we have 3 papers from JIPS under a common research theme. So we not only feature prominent scholars in the field, as some of you in the panel today, who have been published a lot, right? But we also provide a lot of platform for emerging voices. So including a lot of the younger scholars who might be publishing in our journals for the very first time. So it's a great honor today to have our guest co-host today, Professor Rajneesh Narula. He already introduced, say hi a little bit, and also Dana Minbaeva. So I'm going to talk a little bit about them and then let them take over the webinar. So Rajneesh, we all know Rajneesh, right? So Rajneesh is the John Dunning Chair at University of Reading, and he's also the director of Dunning Africa Center. So he's currently prospective editors of JIP. So we also feature some of the JIP articles in other webinars. So today, just by coincidence, all the 3 articles are from JIPS. And then Dana used to be our co-host. So I think Dana is actually one of the founding moderators of this webinar series. So Dana is a professor of strategic human capital at King's Business School, King's College London. Dana is a fellow of AIB. Rajneesh is also a fellow of AIB, I forgot to mention. And Dana is currently associate editor at AMR. So last, I want to mention that it's not only about speakers, it's also about all of you, our audience. We value your participation and engagement, so we encourage you to ask questions and share your thoughts through the Q&A function in Zoom. So at the bottom of the screen, you should see the button that says Q&A. You can write your question there. You can also press like the button questions so that make the questions move up in the list, so that bring them to the attention. All right, so with that being said, so I'm going to pass this over to my guest co-host, Rajneesh. Take over.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. Always a pleasure. I am known for never following rules, so I'm going to bend all the rules now, because I think one of the key things I'm realizing as I look at the theme of the webinar, global mobility and MNE competitiveness. And this is all the papers, not coincidentally, or all the presenters today are contributors to the special issue which Dana and I have developed, and for which there is an introduction. As Stephanie says, it hasn't come out yet, and it will be out, I think, in the next couple of months. But the point I want to emphasize is that the special issue and the papers are focused on beyond global mobility rather than global mobility. Because, in a way, the problem with a lot of research is we're always focused on what happened in the past. We're always talking about the past. The interesting thing is to look forward and to see what do the developments in the field and in real life, in practice, determine or shape what the world will look like in 10 years' time or 20 years' time. And that was kind of the theme of the special issue, which, by the way, is edited by Dana, myself, Anu Fene, and Stacey Fitzsimmons. Stacey is also in the audience here today. So it's a very interesting discussion which goes beyond. And I think one of the mistakes people made, and we made in the beginning, was to think that global mobility was about migration, which of course it isn't necessarily so, because migration is something about the movement of people, and human capital mobility is what we are focused on. Human capital are people working within and around and about, engaged with multinationals. And that's the theme that we've been looking at. And that's the theme here, human capital mobility. We're looking at how the world has changed, how globalization has affected the way in which multinationals affect and cause and take advantage of capital mobility. And of course, being IB scholars, we tried to put this into IB theory lens. That is to say, we're talking about firm-specific advantages as well as location advantages. So what I'm trying to say is that we're only focused on individuals insofar as they're employed or employable directly or indirectly by firms and enterprises engaged in cross-border activity. That's what our focus is. So I just want to say that up front, Stephanie, and I think it's key to point out that really, in a way, migration, which is a very sensitive topic for many, many reasons in many, many governments, is to some extent overblown as a subject. And we are really kind of making this clear focus that, one of the big changes in globalization is that for centuries, much of history, human capital was immovable. It was a location-bound asset. And now, in the last 20 or 30 years, globalization has changed the nature of human capital. It's now a movable object. All the economic theory we learned in school told us about the fact that labor was immovable, was bound, location-bound, and that's something that has fundamentally changed. So that's kind of the background I want to put in, the conceptual idea behind the special issue, and as well as this webinar today. So I really want to make that point. And we're looking to the future in a way. What we want to do is point, at least the 3 papers we have today is just part of 6 papers in the special issue. And these papers all point towards these research questions. And it's not, we'd like to have had all 6 papers, but be that as it may, we have 3 wise people with wise ideas. And I think without further ado, let me pass it back to Stephanie, and they can introduce themselves. I was going to go and read out their bios, but that's so boring. People know their bios better than I do, and they can tell us what they think is the most important thing. Back to you, Stephanie.
So that's great, actually, Rajneesh. So we're going to move to the 3 speakers to share their paper. So they're going to focus on the high level, the most important information of their paper. So the goal is to make you, if you want to know more about the paper, go read the paper. So we're going to follow the order. So the first presentation is going to be Tony. So Tony Edward. So just briefly, I know that you don't want to read people's bio, but we have people, part of our webinar also converted to podcast series. So for people listening to this, I think it's nice to have a little bit of background. So I know our speakers has a lot of things. I just highlight 2 things. So Tony Edwards, a professor of international business at Loughborough University. So his research is really focused on human resource management challenges that multinational companies face. So I think, which is Tony has been an associate editor of Human Resource Management Journal. He's currently completed 5 years as a dean at the university, which I always feels like that's amazing, being productive in so many dimensions. All right, so the virtual floor is yours, Tony.
Stephanie, thanks very much, and to Rajneesh as well. Thank you very much. So I'm going to share my screen. Can you see that?
Perfect.
Stephanie?
Perfect. Yeah, this is perfect.
Yeah, great. Okay, so the paper which I've authored with 5 co-authors, 1 or 2 of whom I think are in the virtual room today, has the title Forgotten Globalizing Actors. I'll aim to give you a sense of what that means, who we're referring to. I'll start by sharing a little bit about the context of how we got into looking at that issue. Essentially, the purpose of the research, wider research, is to look at the process of global norm making. We feel that our previous research had told us about the wide range of structures that cross borders within multinational companies, be those company-level structures like international divisions or global business functions, or indeed those at a more micro level, like global virtual teams or international working groups on particular issues. And what we wanted to look at was the complement to that of how ideas that underpin those structures become established, and we could refer to them as norms, and how those operate at the global level. We wanted to look at how these things we call global norms, ideas which have become regularized and standardized and have a degree of influence over behavior, operate at the international level, and who in particular is involved in that process. And when we saw the SI and we saw the way it was framed, just as Rajneesh put it, it wasn't just about global mobility, it was about beyond global mobility. We wanted to search for as wide a range of actors who are involved in the global norm-making process as possible. Some of those we anticipated would be globally mobile, and some of them may well be fixed in their location, but still involved in global work. So we wanted to cast our net wide in terms of looking for the widest range as possible of people involved in the global norm-making process. And to do that, we operated a method which is largely qualitative. We got access to a wide range of multinational companies, 17 in total, interviewed multiple people in each company, 153 interviews we used as the data set for this paper. We adopted an approach that we've referred to as following the story. Essentially, what we did was use gatekeepers in each of these companies to establish what the key initiatives were, what the key ideas that were being globalized that might potentially become norms, and then followed that process of who's involved in that process and what role do they play. So we looked to identify emerging global norms and who had been active in the process that led to their existence and operation. We did this iteratively by going between theory and data in a largely abductive way, establishing some codes through theory, refining them for initial analysis, and so on. So what I want to do is give you a sense of what this variation amongst these wide range of individuals involved in this process looks like. So in identifying different types of global role within this process, we thought about the sources of variation and established 3 of these. So one aspect of variation between different people involved in this process was the role within norm-making, the aspect of norm-making in which they were involved. So as the research began to emerge, we saw that some of the individuals we were looking at were playing a creating role. They were creating an idea that subsequently became widespread enough and regularized enough to take on the status of a norm. They were the creating people. There were some who would take that idea and disseminate it to another location or multiple locations. There were those who received that idea and implemented it into practice, and there were some who were monitoring the operation of that norm so that it didn't atrophy or waste away. So we saw the task people were doing vary between creating, disseminating, implementing, and monitoring. Second source of variation was that we saw global norm making as an inherently political process in which interests are at stake. And to be effective, individuals would need a source of influence. Crudely, some rely on authority, others relied on the ability to influence others through the force of their argument or the ability to spot nodes within a network of others who would carry their message for them. In other words, they were using social skills. So in the examples which I'll give in a moment, we distinguish between whether the source of influence is authority or social skills. And thirdly, it became evident to us very early on that there was going to be a huge range in the reach of globalizing actors. Some were influencing a norm which went across the entire company, tens of thousands of employees in some cases. Others were managing a very small team of perhaps 9 or 10 people, and that was their reach. So a huge variation in the sort of reach that globalizing actors had. And we used those 3 dimensions to establish a number of global roles. In order to give you a flavour of what they look like, I'm going to very briefly review 3 of these which are well established in the literature, and then say a little bit more about 3 others that were new. So in thinking about the types of global role, we've structured this in terms of the task, the influence, the reach, the three sources of variation that I've just outlined, and then we give them a name or a title in terms of the type. So the first one that's familiar is those who come up with an idea which they envisage to be company-wide. They have authority to do this, and we call these people globalizing executives. Of course, there's a large literature on executives or directors who play a role in creating something that becomes a global norm. We encountered some of those in our research as well. The second group, which is also very familiar from previous research, is those who we call international assignees. These are people who are charged with taking an idea or set of ideas across borders and implementing it in the country to which they are sent. And they do this largely on the basis of the authority that they have, and they do it across largely two countries. So they have a narrower reach than the executives. International assignees, a familiar group to us. And the third group that's also familiar is those who operate in particular geographical or country responsibility. They are charged with implementing things that come from different levels above them. They have authority within their geographical jurisdiction, so they have a narrow reach, and we call these country managers. So all those are familiar. I want to say a little bit more about other types that have emerged from the research, which are not familiar to us from previous research. So we have the same format of task, influence, reach. So one group that was important in many of the companies we looked at were those who were playing a disseminating role within their country or their unit. This is very common in many of the federal companies we looked at, the federally structured companies like the business services firms formed as partnerships across borders. In these sorts of companies, there is a need to be internationally consistent in the way that they relate to their multinational clients. The partners in one country, which are looking to develop some sort of initiative across borders, often establish, through a process of opting in, a network of local champions or disseminators who do this role of selling an idea within their jurisdiction, within their area, within their unit, not largely on the basis of an authority over others within it, but on the basis that they have particular social skills that enables them to convince others of the merits of the idea that's looking to be globalized. They are able to appeal to the interests of others and to effectively network in order to get buy-in. These are people who establish these parts of these networks of local champions or disseminators, an important group in many of the federally structured companies. So I found an additional group that was very, very widespread in many of our companies who play a role in managing or leading a team with a particular purpose. So this very commonly amongst the IT communications firms that we looked at, where there were multinational clients that required around-the-clock global service. And so one of the global teams that we looked at in one of these firms was managed by someone who operated in their office at home in Georgia in the United States. They managed a team of 3 people in Colombia, 2 in Hungary, 4 in India, so that they had round-the-clock service for their clients. They were client-specific groups. That these groups lasted as long as the client was with the company. If the client moved on, this team would disband and the individuals would be in other teams. They operated with a little bit of authority. The team leader had some authority, but was not the line manager of these individuals. The individuals all had a line manager in their locality. So the limited authority had to rely quite heavily on convincing the others of a coherent global approach. So it was a mixture of limited authority and social skill. And a large number of these people operating across a very large geographical region, multiple continents, but sometimes with tiny numbers of people, like 9 or 10 in the example that I gave. But we found a large number of these sorts of people in many of the companies we looked at. And the final example I give is those who are not charged by any senior person with being a globalizing actor, but were simply looking to make their work a little bit more predictable or manageable. So there were some who we looked at in market research organizations where they were producing industry-based reports, where there was an interdependence across countries. So we looked at London-based journalists in one of these organizations who would specify what it was the topic of their next article or feature. They were dependent for the background research on a unit in India, which produced a report for them. And they then wrote the article on the basis of this background report. Now, this process wasn't governed effectively by rules from management, and became very unpredictable and very difficult to operate, particularly for the journalists, who then effectively took it on themselves with their co-workers in India to say, we need to regularize this process. We need to make it clearer when we ask for particular information, what quality thresholds govern that activity. We may need to make it clearer what's a reasonable time frame for the return of the information. And so these people were effectively taking it on themselves to become globalizing actors. They were self-initiated in this process. And there's an awful lot of this sort of activity going on within many multinational companies. This gives a sense of the sort of range of people who are involved in global norm making within multinational companies. I just want to tie this together with 3 conclusions. The first is that there's a wide range of people involved in global norm making, perhaps a wider range than is featured in most literature on this topic. So a large number of these groups have not actually been documented in previous work. And I think one of the contributions of the paper is to tend towards an appreciation of that wide range. And the 6 that I've highlighted here are not the totality of those in the paper, and we don't claim that the 9 that we do identify in the paper are themselves exhaustive of all of those we might find had we looked at other types of companies and other situations. But the point is there's a much wider range of people involved in this process than we feel has been appreciated in previous studies. The second is the linked point that the range of people that have not been documented in previous work, who we call forgotten globalizing actors, are absolutely crucial in making cross-border interactions work to be effective. So you can establish the wide range of structures that I began the presentation by saying exist within international companies. But unless you have those who are capable of making those operate through the sort of softer process of norms underpinning work, then those structures on their own are unlikely to be effective. So the capabilities and activities of a range of people we call forgotten globalizing actors are a crucial element to how effectively multinationals are going to be operating across borders. And third, what comes out of many of those that are forgotten in this process is that social skills are a really important element of how they operate. And a key managerial challenge, therefore, is how social skill can be identified, how it supplements authority, and sometimes how it operates instead of it. That's the essence of my paper, which I hope that summary was of interest. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand back to Rajneesh and Stephanie.
Thank you so much. It is a really interesting paper. And may I just briefly mention that there was so many new ideas in the paper that we asked them to split it into 2. So I suspect there are a couple of more papers coming out on this particular theme. So look out for that. Back to you, Stephanie.
Okay, great. Yes, I like this paper a lot. I think it's a great reminder for all the globalizing actors and a broader group of people, and many of those are not typically studied. So great job, Tony. Thank you so much for sharing. So our next speaker is Nguyen, assistant professor from University of Groningen, the Netherlands. Han's research lies in the intersection of human resource management and labor economics, focusing on labor market dynamics and flexibility. So as I said earlier, so this webinar is not only featuring prominent scholars like Dana, Rajneesh, and Tony, but also rising stars like Han. So the virtual floor is yours, Han.
Thank you very much, Stephanie, for the nice introduction. Now I could like to sharing my screen. Did you see my screen? Yeah, thank you very much. So I'm very happy to present our research on multinational firms and the quest for global talent, focusing on the employing foreign workers at home and abroad. So to begin with, I would like to give an introduction to multinationals and their search for global talent. In the past decades, developed countries have been facing a major challenge of labor scarcity, especially the scarcity of qualified labor. And the global mobility of workers has provided, I'm sorry, can I just, sorry, I don't know why, but it stops. Can I do, yeah. Sorry for the interruption. So I would like to continue with the presentation. So like I mentioned that the major challenges of many developed countries is the facing of a scarcity for qualified laborers. And the global mobilities of workers provide multinationals important opportunities to deal with labor shortages, especially the shortages of skilled labor. The reason is that migrant workers bring with them the unique human capitals and have the ability to bring external networks that can facilitate knowledge transfer within the multinationals company. And in the search for global talent, we consider that multinationals has two ways to assess foreign talents, and they have this opportunity more than compared to domestic firms because they can employ foreign workers through their foreign subsidiaries. So the two channels of multinationals to assess foreign talent is either to employ foreign workers as migrants in the home countries of the multinationals or hiring foreign workers through the foreign subsidiaries of multinationals in the countries of origin of the foreign workers. And we conceptualize the two hiring channels of multinationals as our coordinated employment decisions. And we argue that examining whether and how multinationals coordinate domestic and foreign employment decisions will give us a better understanding of the microdynamics of the employment decisions of multinationals that usually underpin knowledge creation, knowledge transfer, and knowledge recombinations that serve as a source for competitive advantage of multinationals firms. Our study draws on the knowledge-based view of multinationals, and the core idea of the knowledge-based view of multinationals is the ability of multinationals to create, transfer, and recombine knowledge across the national's border to gain competitive advantage. And multinationals can achieve this by coordinating operations through the network of domestic and foreign affiliates. And drawing on the knowledge-based view in our paper, we integrate the three strands of literature that have been examined quite separately in prior research. Those are the literature on migration and FDI, the literature on learning by hiring and employment education of multinational firms, and the literature on global talent management. The first strand of literature on migration and foreign direct investment has documented a positive association between FDI and migration at the macro level. One of the possible explanations is that migration facilitates knowledge and networks between the home and the host countries, as well as facilitate trade and investment opportunities. Therefore, micro research highlights a complementarity relationship between FDI and migration. The second line of research is on learning by hiring perspective. The literature on learning by hiring and cross-border employee mobility has documented the positive contributions of hiring migrants to the hiring firms. And the reason is that migrants bring with them the unique human capital as well as external knowledge. Those are accumulated through the prior study and work experience of the migrants abroad. And for that reason, this can enhance knowledge flows and knowledge recombination within the multinational firms, and has the opportunity to contribute to the organizational innovation performance. And finally, the first strand of literature on global talent management also explain multinationals' activities, including attracting, developing, and retaining talent across locations. And research also showing that effective diversity management of employers are usually have to attract more high-skilled migrants to their hiring firms. However, the failure of employment coordination across location can hinder the multinationals' cross-learning opportunities. Research also indicates a crucial principle for effective talent management is to balance the global and local needs. And align with this view, in our papers, we consider that a multinational's decision to hire foreign worker from a host country, either in its foreign subsidiary or as a migrant in its domestic operations, should aim for an optimal allocation of talent across locations. Overall, our paper draw on the knowledge-based view and consider that multinationals has two main ways to employ foreign talents. First, multinationals can move closer to the source of foreign talents by establishing foreign subsidiaries and employ local talent there. Or second, multinationals can employ foreign workers as migrants in their domestic operations. And in this paper, we formulate three mechanisms that can affect the relationship between domestic and foreign employment of foreign workers. Those mechanisms are contextual knowledge complementarity, activity substitution, and human capital substitution. And we argue that these three mechanisms both influences that can lead to either a complementarity or a substitutive relationship between the two ways of employing foreign talents by multinational firms. To begin with, in hypothesis 1, where we focus on the contextual knowledge complementarity, we argue that in order to assess contextual knowledge about a foreign market, multinationals can hire foreign workers from the foreign market at their domestic operations, because employing migrants domestically help multinationals to understand foreign markets. For example, understand the functioning of the foreign markets, access to foreign networks, as well as better identify products and services that can be developed to meet foreign demand, and hence can help multinationals steer affiliate strategies in an appropriate manner. However, we argue that the need for migrants' employment domestically will be greater if there are larger differences in languages, cultures, and institutional contexts between the multinational's home country and the countries of origins of the migrant workers. In addition, knowledge diversity also very important for organizational learning and decision making, because employing workers from different nationalities and cultures rather than solely employing native workers will be likely to increase the entrepreneurial activities of multinational firms, such as foreign expansions. So for those reasons, we hypothesize that a multinational firms' domestic employment growth of migrants from a focal foreign country, in which we call domestic employment growth from the perspective of a multinational firm, and the employment expansion of foreign affiliates of the firm in that country, which we call foreign employment growth from the perspective of a multinational firm, are more likely to be complements if the home and the host country have a larger contextual distance. Turning to the second hypothesis, we base on the knowledge-based view of multinational firms, and the focal point in the knowledge-based view is that where to locate activities in order to maximize knowledge sourcing, knowledge combinations, and also knowledge exploitation while leveraging cost advantages. For example, where to locate activities in order to access high qualified labor with low cost. However, we also argue that given the cost minimization problem of multinational firms and the optimal allocation of their activities, which are more likely to lead to a potential substitution between foreign and domestic employment of foreign workers, such substitution effects is more likely to depend on the motivation of foreign direct investment of multinational firms. So multinational firms has two types of FDI motivations. The first one is factor-seeking FDI. So factor-seeking FDI motivation is driven by cost reduction motivations. And within factor-seeking FDI, for example, multinationals are likely to offshoring their domestic operations to lower wage cost countries, which leading to more potential substitutions between domestic and foreign employment. In contrast, market-seeking FDI motivation is referred to the market expansion motivations of multinational firms, where multinationals likely to facilitate the exports of final goods and final products to higher wage countries where having high purchasing powers. And we argue that the activity substitution is more likely for factor-seeking FDI motivation, and which leading to a more substitutive relationship between the domestic and foreign employments of foreign workers. So for this reason, we hypothesize that domestic and foreign employment growth are more substitutive with a larger wage cost differentials between the home and host countries. And finally, in the third hypothesis, where we emphasize the human capital substitution, we argue that even if multinationals optimize their activities across location, under the pressure of labor scarcity, especially skill scarcity, global talent management may still lead to a substitution between foreign and domestic employment of foreign workers at the employee level. And if labor scarcity is an issue and human capital is a core resource for multinational firm, multinational is more likely to aim for global hiring. We also expect that the globally coordinated employment decisions of multinational firms is most relevant for highly skilled employees because highly skilled workers are more mobile across location as their skills and knowledge can be applicable in many different work environments. And for that reason, migration is a stronger feature for high-skilled laborers rather than low-skilled labor. And we argue that the more scarcity, mobility, and also employability together with higher search costs for high-skilled laborers, the more likely the substitutive relationship between domestic and foreign employment growth, especially when multinationals operations are more skill intensities. For that reason, in the third hypothesis, we argue that domestic and foreign employment growth are more likely to be substitutives if the operations of the multinational are more skill intensive. To test our hypothesis, we use a data set of about 2,000 Dutch multinational firms with subsidiaries in one or more 54 countries for the period between 2008 until 2016. And we formulate the two hiring channels of foreign workers by multinational firms as a simultaneous equations model, and using three-stage least square regression as well as instrumental variable approach. So in the two equations, we use foreign employment growth as a dependent variable and domestic employment growth as a key independent variable. And in the other equations, we use domestic employment growth as the dependent variable and foreign employment growth as the key independent variables. And we also model the two equations with an interactions with the three mechanisms for knowledge complementarity, activity substitution, and human capital substitution. So what do we find? In our paper, we find that 1% increase in domestic employment growth decreases foreign employment growth by 0.29%. And 1% increase in foreign employment growth decreases domestic employment growth by 0.08%. This indicates a substitutive relationship between domestic and foreign employment growth of foreign workers by multinational firms. We also find that this substitution effect is significantly weaker when the contextual distance between the multinational's home country and the source country of foreign workers is larger. And this supports our first hypothesis. We additionally find that the substitution effect is significantly stronger in lower wage countries, which supports our second hypothesis. And finally, we find that the substitution effect is significantly greater for firms that have knowledge-intensive operations both at home and abroad, which supports our third hypothesis. Our paper has advanced the knowledge-based view of multinational firms by provide an integrated perspectives on how multinationals coordinate their employment decisions of foreign workers at home and abroad. Under the conditions of labor scarcity, opportunities to assess labor cost reductions, and as well as the activity substitution and FDI motivations. Our findings also give evidence that multinationals can choose which mode of employing foreign talent is most beneficial by taking into account the required skill levels and the motivations of foreign affiliate employment expansion of multinationals. We also take into account the challenges in expanding abroad due to contextual distance between the multinationals' home country with the country of origin of the foreign talents. And our findings also provide new insights into the literature on global talent management and cross-border mobility of workers by provide insights into how multinationals optimize the allocation of global talents across global operations. And we also show that multinationals face higher costs and complexity of conducting operations in an interchange with countries exhibiting greater contextual distance. And finally, our findings indicate that cultural diversity may stimulate creativity and entrepreneurial decision-making by facilitating more foreign expansions. In order to end our presentation, we also would like to suggest some direction for future research. So first, we would like to suggest future research can focus on the diversity of organizational approaches to talent and diversity management. Second, a future research may also look into case studies on multinational management practices, which could be a fruitful complementary research. Additionally, we suggest that future research can also model native employment growth in multinational home countries. And finally, we suggest that our research findings could be generalized to multinationals in other countries. Thank you very much for listening.
Great, thank you so much.
Sharing.
Yeah, thank you so much, Han. So for the sixth time, we're going to directly move to the last but not least presentation by Massimiliano. So Massimiliano is now assistant professor at University of Turin, Italy. I believe this is also your first JIPS publication as well. So welcome to the better world. Just kidding. So he is an applied economist. His research focuses on the economics of innovation and science, and his main research interest related to knowledge creation and diffusion. And his recent work focused on investigating scientific foundation of green technology supporting transition to a circular economy. All right, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to share my screen, which you should now be able to see, I hope. Okay. So thank you very much for the opportunity to present our work. So this is a joint effort with Ernest Migueles from the Spanish Scientific Research Council, Francesco Lissoni from University of Bordeaux, and Sarah Egarty from Swinburne University of Technology. So allow me to start with a short example, which was actually at the origin of the idea behind this paper. So back in 2021, Pfizer inaugurated two new research facilities, IT facilities in Greece, in Thessaloniki. And at the presentation of these facilities, there was both the CEO of Pfizer, so Albert Bourla, which is a native of Thessaloniki, and the Greek Prime Minister. During the presentation, the latter said, highlighted the importance of Dr. Bourla's origin and stated that following his great success, Bourla is now giving back to his hometown and country by investing in Thessaloniki. Actually, the story is a little bit different, as reported by Albert Bourla in a related interview, in which he said that there was zero philanthropy involved in the Pfizer investment, and he actually says that so Pfizer was looking to restructure its IT support around the globe. He proposed Thessaloniki, and at the beginning he encountered some resistance within the company because he says they didn't even know the city. But he continues, because I was the CEO, they were forced to reconsider, and at the end they were surprised by the level of the people who speak English. So this Pfizer investment and the biography of Pfizer CEO, Dr. Bourla, in a nutshell, illustrate what our paper is about and our research question. So, namely, what we did is try to understand whether and under what circumstances top managers issued from international migration contribute to direct their companies' foreign direct investments towards their country of origin. And this is relevant not only for first-generation migrants, like the case of Dr. Bourla, but more generally for all migrants or members of the international diasporas, as long as they are still able to provide their companies with useful inputs like personal knowledge and non-stereotyped views or potential targets. So the literature in international business already highlighted the role of international diasporas, especially in attracting investments from their country of origin to their host countries. Most of this literature focuses on actors that are actually outside the firm, such as customers, business partners, or prospective employers. Few of them focus on companies' executives or migrant inventors, which are those that are the closest to our study. But what we propose is to we try to show that the effect on the direction of FDIs is affected not only by an entire ethnic community, but can be affected even by one single individual, as long as this individual is in an apical position within the firm. So hence our focus on foreign origin managers in top management team in multinational enterprises. So to do so, we rely on the upper echelons theory, which assumes that strategic decision-making within the firm is conditioned by managers' field of vision, selective perception, and interpretation of information. And research in this area tries to find some observational equivalents, such as age, education, or socioeconomic backgrounds, to infer manager different cognitive process. One of the indicators that is explored in this literature is nationality. Not only from a legal point of view, or not so much from a legal point of view, but rather from a cultural point of view. So nationality is open to various definitions. The one that we adopt from the literature is the identities of one parent, or the personal sense of identity. And in the paper, we use the term foreign origin. So we do this to distinguish more clearly what we mean from the migrant versus native legal status, and also because this allows us to more clearly span across multiple generations and to relate more clearly to individual ties with the country of origin. Another important characteristic in this literature is the diversity in the top management team. So TMT members of different nationalities are expected to contribute to their company's internationalization strategies by offering alternative appreciations of cost and benefits of specific operation or general strategies. And so this can help to overcome domestic myopia and result in a more accurate decision-making, but it can also be the case that a high TMT diversity can lead to fragmented TMT into like-minded groups and can increase the sources of conflict. In any case, this literature has not paid a lot of attention to the location choices, so to the possibility that the country of origin of some of the TMT members may affect actually where their companies will invest. That's why we shift our the focus from diversity per se to the specific knowledge that diverse managers may have of different countries. So based on this literature, we postulate our first hypothesis, our baseline hypothesis, which is the existence of what we call a manager from target effect. So that is that conditional on investing abroad, companies with foreign origin managers in their TMT are more likely to target their manager country of origin. all other things being equal. From this, we expect that this manager from target effect, we expect it to be more relevant when the individual input that the foreign manager gives are more valuable. So, for example, one of these conditions might depend on the establishment mode. So we expect this effect to be stronger for M&As with respect to greenfield investments, because we consider that for a company, M&As are riskier investments, so are usually involve a higher cost and higher risk, also related to higher information asymmetries. And related to the TMT diversity, again, we might consider that a high diversity in the TMT can lead to a higher openness, so to a higher consideration in the TMT to the personal inputs provided by individual managers. And in the case, we might expect that a manager from target effect will be stronger. But as I mentioned, so it could also be the case that this higher diversity can lead to higher conflicts, and in this case, we would expect that this manager from target effect would be weaker. So, in a nutshell, what we do is that we retrieve from Orbis data about cross-border investment, so M&As and greenfield investments. For each investing firm, we retrieve managers' names that are employed by the firm before the investment. And then using ethno-linguistic analysis, we analyze names and surnames of this manager, and we associate to them a vector of likely country of origin. And then we look contingent of each investment if that investor firm has a manager which is likely to be from the target country. Then we use a match sample regression. We perform a match sample regression analysis with fixed effect, and we perform a linear probability model. So I'm not showing the regression table which are in the paper, but let me just summarize our findings. So we actually find support for our first hypothesis, for the existence of these managers from target effect. So we find that a company, on average, with a manager with a foreign manager from a country is 9% more likely to invest in that country. And we also find that this effect is much stronger in the case for M&As with respect to greenfield investments, which was our second hypothesis. So in the case of M&As, we find that this managers from target effect goes up to 43%. And with respect to the moderating effect of TMT diversity, we find in some regression, we find slightly support for our hypothesis 3b. So we find the interaction of our proxy of TMT diversity is with our variable for foreign managers is negative. So basically what we find is that our manager from target effect is stronger when TMT diversity is lower. Okay, so there are several avenues of further research that could be explored. For instance, one could investigate other moderating conditions of these managers from target effect that we find. We explore some of these in the online appendix of the paper, but many other things could be done. For instance, this effect could be explored in the context of a lack of alternative knowledge sources. Several moderating effects could be found in the target country characteristics, like the business environment, or in the investment characteristics. And also, researchers might be interested to look at this problem on the other way around, so exploring whether these foreign managers might have a biased view towards their country of origin, or they might be moved by personal interest to influence these investments. And a way to do that would be through trying to understand if the performance of these foreign direct investments influenced by these foreign managers, if these investments perform better when they are influenced by foreign managers. And if it is the case, it could also be possible to derive some managerial implication, such as it would be advisable to rely on foreign manager advice about investing in their country of origin. So if it would be the case, then that would create one further reason, beside those already explored in the literature, in the upper echelons literature, to promote diversity in the top management team. Okay, I hope it wasn't too fast or too slow, but thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that really interesting presentation. In fact, 3 excellent presentations. So, you know, it's one of those things, we never have enough time in these type of events, and we're running rather low in terms of time. Let me first reintroduce everyone to Dana, my brilliant co-editor and co-host, who has now managed to escape the traffic of London and is in the right place, as well as Stacey Fitzsimmons, who is also one of the editors of the special issue. Now, I'm going to keep things brief because I just want to highlight a couple of points from our editorial, mainly pointing to a few highlights, I think, of what we think are managerial challenges. And I'm going to just be one slide, I promise. And then we can turn it over to Dana, who will handle the Q&A. So without further ado, let me just jump into the slide. Application window. And you know, I'm not known for my technological abilities, and I believe I've successfully achieved this. If this should say more managerial challenges. So, what I really want to highlight is a couple of things. You know, the theme beyond global mobility is to point towards the future, not to look at the past, as I said in the beginning. And we've tried our best in the introduction to try and introduce an IB lens and talk about FSA's ownership advantages and location advantages, to put it in the context, because this matters. Human capital mobility matters to firms in such systemic ways that you know, it's something that actually creates a research field in economics, in IB, in management. And so I think that was an important point. And one of the things that we really realized was that multinationals rely on the fact that they're able to move human capital between countries quite efficiently, and this gave them an advantage. But now globalization means everyone can do the same thing. And you know, this is an FSA that has declined in value because small firms are able to do it, large firms are able to do it, domestic firms are able to become international more rapidly. Also, the wage differential is shrinking. We no longer see a massive wage differential between multinationals and domestic firms. So it really has important managerial implications. Now, one of the other things we really came up with, especially in Tony's presentation, was the issue of boundary spanning roles. And this comes up so many times in all aspects of IB, not just in the IHRM area, that really multinationals are meta-integrators, they're orchestrators, they're combining different sets of assets together. And this is really, so these kind of people are hard to find, actually, to find people who can understand and transmit and coordinate. Then they are rare people, and everyone's looking for them. There is a shortage of such kinds of managers. So I think this is really something we need to understand of how to, if we're going to have multinationals in the longer run, and not even GVCs, everything needs coordination, and that's really a challenge. So, you know, this is a kind of becomes what used to be a peripheral competence is now a core competence, and that's really something important. So, looking at how the corporate HR function utilizes subsidiaries and manages to move the right kinds of people to the right kind of places and create and also to utilize people who are not really working for you, are outsourced to you, who are quasi-internalized to you. How does the subsidiary and local interface influence across the corporate organization, across the global aspect? So really dealing with local champions, dealing with subsidiaries, coordinating between all of these activities becomes increasingly challenging. And I think the core thing is human capital is a much more specialized conversation. It's no longer something that people can postpone looking at. It is central to the strategy of every firm. So that's my really quick summary of what we as editors felt were the key kind of managerial implications of the special issue. And of course, feel free to read this and write about it. Let me now pass it to the incomparable Dana Minbaeva, who will handle all questions further.
Thank you very much. And welcome to the Q&A session, shall I say. Let's start with a few questions from Tony. Actually, we have this one question around the forgotten globalizing actors. Can you tell us give us a few examples of what happens when companies pay insufficient attention to them? Stacy called them in the chat. She would love to hear any cautionary tales. So Tony.
Dana, thank you. Yes, I saw Stacey's question in the chat. I think it's a very good question. I'll give you one example, and it relates to the final illustrative case that I gave in my presentation, which was around what I called self-initiated globalizing actors, because one of the key dynamics that we witnessed in many of our cases was that there was a bottom-up element to global norm making as well as a top-down one. And in one of the other cases that I could have mentioned, we saw this being thwarted by those from above. So the case was of a pharmaceuticals company. We had observed that the parent company wanted to keep the multinational operations into legally separate businesses, as a way of preserving limited liability should they be sued in relation to some of their drugs which had side effects, which was very much a live issue for them. So they'd broken up the company into separately owned legal entities, even though the ultimate ownership was, it was no secret, was the same ultimate owning controlling company. Now what we found on the ground was that many of the people who were interfacing with the medical community that they were looking to sell to at global conferences were wanting to do this in a joined up way. They weren't wanting to pitch up and give papers at presentations or talk to medical professionals in a way that wasn't joined up. They wanted to present a common message about the identical product they were selling in different regions, and form their own networks about how they were to do this in order to make their interface with their clients smoother, more effective. Now that was what one element of what we saw as global norm making from the bottom that was thwarted by the lawyers. When the lawyers got hold of this, they said, we've got to stop this, because if it came out in any legal proceedings that we are in effect an integrated company where people are talking to one another, then our argument that we are legally separate entities will fall apart and the liability will spread across the whole company and the whole thing could unravel. So we saw in that case the sort of, whether it's exactly as Stacey put it, insufficient attention paid to those on the ground, it's kind of in that area where, to make their work more effective, the dynamic of global norm making was from the bottom that was thwarted actually by those from the top. So it was a kind of almost a reversal of what's often assumed in the literature, which is there's a top-down dimension which is somehow resisted from those in the units. So that's one example, I think, Dana.
Very interesting. Thank you very much. I'm just gonna move on to our second presenter, and Han, thank you so much for interesting presentation. Oh, there are a couple of questions for you. So the easiest one, it's about the data set that you were referring to. Nguyen is asking whether this data set is as publicly accessible. So perhaps a couple of words about the data.
So for this question, we use a data set from Statistics Netherlands, and the data set is not publicly accessible, but if researchers want to access the data, they have to register and make an application with the Statistics Netherlands.
Right, and you have to be, I think, employed by one of the local institutions. Yeah. Actually, Stacy, you have also a small question for Han. Maybe you could unmute yourself and ask that.
Sure. And actually, I mean, this is relevant to both Han and Massimiliano's presentation as well. But I was struck by how both of the latter two presentations address what's happening in public debate around many of our countries, and this question about are immigrants taking jobs away from locals, and that would be akin to Han's substitutability category, or are they growing our economies? That would be the complementarity idea. And I mean, I see Massimiliano's, your presentation was more addressing the latter, the complementarity idea of growing by investing abroad. But I would love to hear if either of you have any comments about how your research addresses that debate.
So first of all, thank you so much for your interesting question, Stacy. In our paper, as I mentioned at the end of the presentation, is that we didn't look into the simultaneous employment of migrants and native from the multinationals perspective. And because that's not the focus of our papers, so for the findings of our paper, we can only give insights into the discussion between complementarity or substitution for the relationship of employment between a foreign or domestic employment of foreign workers, but we're not able to give a clear suggestion on how this influence simultaneously with the employment of native in the multinational hub country. However, in our research, in the analysis, we also control for the level of employees, including natives workers in the analysis, and we found a small positive correlation between the growth of foreign migrants' employment in domestic operations of multinationals with the level of multinationals employees in domestic operations. And for that, we think it's not a clear evidence that whether migrants can still take away jobs from natives, and we think it would be a very nice and fruitful direction for future research to model this in a simultaneous equation.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. Massimiliano, anything to add in here?
Yeah, I mean, so our paper is a little bit more general on this, but of course we also are interested in what Stacy was suggesting, which is to understand this complementarity. So what we try to do, especially in the online appendix, because of reason of space in the paper, was to provide again some sense of how this effect and when this effect of a migrant manager could be more important. And of course, what we find is that it would be important when, for instance, the cultural difference between the migrant country of origin and the country of the firm is larger, or when the political and institutional difference is larger. So we do find some sort of effect that goes into the direction in the direction of highlighting the importance of these workers, the high-skilled migrant workers for investments.
Great, thank you so much. I'm gonna have I'm gonna ask one question, all three presenters, and would like you to be very brief. The question is coming from David, who is asking, how can cultural or business norms misalignments hinder the successful integration of immigrants into multinational enterprises, and what strategies can firms use to bridge this gap? Right, Tony, starting with you, let's focus particularly on the strategies. What these things are happening. So what can multinationals do to bridge the misalignments created?
Okay, well, what I would say is that, and what featured in my paper maybe relates to this, is the emphasis on social skill. So if you understand social skill as the ability to influence others by providing them with common meanings and identities, which is the way that Pfligstein and McAdam, the use of it that we adopted, define it, then I think you can think about how social skill can bridge cultural boundaries, is the ability of certain people, and not all of whom are moving between countries now, some of them are fixed in their location. What sort of social skill do they have that enables them to provide those common meanings and identities across borders. And what can, in terms of the corporate strategies, how can companies identify and develop those skills in people? That would be the key thing I think I would pull out.
There's an interesting comment from CK Noble in the chat around reference to the point to the findings, but at least paper by Rice 2004. So I'll suggest for our participants perhaps to look that up. But moving on with strategies, Han, what's your suggestion?
Yeah. So regarding the misalignment in terms of skills that you mentioned, from the perspective of our papers, we also look into how large is the contextual knowledge between the home countries of the multinational firm and the countries of origins of the migrants. And we think that's the larger the contextual distance in terms of like institutional context or cultures, and also like the languages, the main languages between the two countries, the more complementary that we think that multinationals can access to foreign talents in both channels. And we think that that is the base complementary based on skills and the contextual distance knowledge that multinational can access to foreign talents from the host country of the migrant workers.
Sounds good. Thank you. Massimiliano, same question to you.
So thank you. Yeah, so that's a great question. That's very interesting idea for a future research. So the only thing that we do in that direction in the paper, as I was mentioning, is that we try to measure whether, and it's actually what we find, the higher the diversity in we're using several proxy: linguistic diversity, cultural diversity, institutional diversity, political diversity between the country in which the migrant work and their country of origin, the more important is their role of reducing basically information asymmetries. But how the multinational can reduce this difference and to get a better integration, it's something that is very interesting for a future research.
Brilliant. And that's exactly a point that Majid is pointing out also in the chat, that there is definitely a huge country effect. I'm going to round up, but before I pass to Stephanie, I have one reflection question to my co-editors in here. So to you, Rajneesh, and to you, Stacey. What should we do differently from now on in research on global mobility? We have so many interesting submissions. We have so many interesting papers going through towards the actual publication. We worked extensively on this editorial. We had lots of very long discussions around that. So what? Now that we know all this, what should we stop doing perhaps in research on global mobility, and what should we start doing qualitatively different? Rajneesh, let's start with you. Let's start with you, and then to Stacey.
Okay. I have been actually thinking about this issue, and as this morning I was reading our introductory paper to make a few slides, I started realizing, first of all, that we spend so much energy focusing on the multinational, but the multinational as we know it no longer exists. FDI as we know it is no longer the primary form of engagement with foreign markets and foreign suppliers and foreign customers. We're moving really towards non-equity modes, global value chains. Even small firms are able to do this, to leverage things. So the way in which you manage people, I mean, this is how do you, I mean, because people are the core asset of every firm, but they are not your people anymore. In another paper somewhere else, I talked about the issue of the boundaries of responsibility versus boundaries of ownership and boundaries of control. You're controlling activities, but you're not owning any of them. Therefore, you have no responsibility for them. So this is really, how much do you care about your employees if they're not really your employees? How do you prevent IPR loss? This is one of the issues that I think we really have to discuss. And then, but related to that is resilience. How do you have resilience of an organization if when you have a crisis, you let people go, but you can't get them back because the key people are in great demand. You are not able to fix it. This is we see with how many years since the pandemic, companies are still recovering from the pandemic. It's 4 or 5 years have gone by and everything is still in a transient state in post COVID pandemic. So I think these are some of the issues that come to mind really. And one of the things that really I also wake up and more than 10 years ago, with a couple of colleagues, we started thinking about the idea of how can you manage such a complex organization. And I came up with the concept of bandwidth. You need a lot of resources to know about everything happening in every part of the organization with every subsidiary, every partner, every collaborator. And this requires such huge amounts of resources that it becomes impractical to run a big multinational, especially in this world of globalization. So these are areas I think I would like to explore a little bit more moving forward. I think with you, Dana, if possible, and Stacey and Anu, we had a great time working together. So yes, this would be my research wish list.
Yeah, interesting. Well, you also know that you don't manage complexity; you interact with that, right? So, well, anyway, that's for another webinar. But Stacey, your few points, please.
Thanks, Dana. So as Rajneesh indicated at the very beginning of the webinar, this special issue was beyond global mobility. And I think that's the part that I'm most interested in, where you notice that all of these papers, they introduce as Tony put it, the forgotten globalizing actors, whether these are the local people or whether these are immigrants who were not moved abroad by the multinational. But I think that these are the people who, a final group that wasn't indicated in today's webinar pieces would be less skilled labor, right, which also has a large amount of global mobility. And in the international business, we haven't really yet explored what are their effects on multinational organizations or international organizations. So I think those are the directions that I'm particularly interested in seeing for the future. So blending together more of the mobility and the migration pieces. And it's where I see some research coming out of Journal of International Business Policy that also addresses this.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Stephanie, for putting this webinar together. Now over to you for a few concluding remarks.
Great. Thank you, Dana. So thank you so much again for the panelists. Thank you. Couldn't thank you enough for making this webinar possible, but also great. Thank you for all the generous insights. And thank you everyone for joining us live today. I saw at peak time we got 53 people. I know that everyone's busy, so I appreciate you coming. And I hope you come away with this webinar with fresh, valuable insights that inspire your own research. I know I got some inspiration for myself. So as Rajneesh mentioned, there are 6 papers in special issue, although we only feature 3 in this webinar. There are also another 3. So make sure to read all those. And of course, the conversation and insights exchanges certainly do not stop here. And finally, big thank you to Tonga Kiak, Executive Director of AIB, and the digital motion team, Dan Rostock and Nicole Hare, and many others behind the scene. Without them, this is not possible either. And the video recording of these webinars can be found at YouTube channel, and the podcast version of each webinar are available in the Podbean page. And thank you, Dana, Rajneesh, and Stacey. And see you next time, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.